A single ballot cast in Kerala is currently worth almost twice as much as a ballot cast in Bihar.
Right. And a ship seized thousands of miles away in the Middle East is actually dictating what kind of fertilizer an Indian farmer can use on their crops today.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today we are looking at the invisible pinch points that are basically running our world.
Yeah, we have a massive stack of current affairs sources to get through today. It covers everything from global maritime blockades to, constitutional debates happening right here at home.
But instead of just giving you a standard news summary, our mission today is to find the hidden thread that connects all of it.
And that thread is the concept of chokeholds and resilience. We're going to look at how physical, digital, and systemic bottlenecks shape everything around you.
And crucially, how nations and systems are attempting to build workarounds. Because in a world of absolute information overload, spotting the underlying mechanisms is key.
Exactly. Finding that invisible line connecting a seized warship in West Asia to a ballot box in Bengal, that is where true understanding actually begins.
And just to set the tone for you listening right now, we are unpacking some incredibly diverse perspectives today.
Some of which carry intense political friction.
Right. So we are keeping things entirely impartial. We aren't taking sides on any political or legal disputes. We are simply looking at the mechanics of the events, strictly based on our source material.
So let's start with the most literal chokeholds we have, which is physical geography and global supply lines.
Okay.
If the global economy has a jugular vein, it is the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, it's that narrow waterway between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. Right?
Exactly. A massive percentage of the world's oil flows right through it. Squeeze that strait, and the whole body panics.
And right now, that vein is being squeezed really hard. Despite U.S. President Donald Trump recently announcing a unilateral ceasefire extension to allow for peace talks with Tehran, Iran's Revolutionary Guards are still actively seizing vessels.
Yeah, just hours after that extension, they fired at 3 container ships and actually seized 2 of them.
And one of those was a Liberia-flagged ship called the Epaminondas. And that ship had actually indicated India's Mundra port as its destination.
Right, so connecting this to the bigger picture requires looking at the immediate economic ripple effect. We have the recent minutes from the Reserve Bank of India's Monetary Policy Committee.
The MPC, yeah.
Right. RBI Governor Sanjay Malhotra explicitly warned that this conflict in West Asia, combined with potential El Niño weather conditions, is threatening to choke the Indian macroeconomy.
Because it disrupts the supply of critical commodities and just spikes energy prices across the board.
Exactly. The RBI is now projecting that GDP growth will dip to 6.9% in the 2026 to 2027 fiscal year.
Wow.
Yeah, where headline retail inflation averaging around 4.6%.
And we're seeing this geopolitical chokehold hit the domestic agricultural sector in real time, too. The supply chain for imported fertilizers is severely disrupted.
It is.
There was a major tender by India Potash Limited, or IPL, for imported fertilizers, and that had to be extended simply because the cargo vessels are physically stuck or rerouting.
Right. And this is compounding other agricultural pressures, like the recent decline in wheat procurement caused by those shifting weather patterns we just mentioned.
So what's fascinating here is how a crisis forces a mechanical pivot.
Yeah.
Because chemical fertilizers are bottlenecked at sea, there's a sudden, massive surge of interest in biostimulants.
Which is really interesting, because these aren't traditional fertilizers where you just dump chemicals into the earth.
Right. They are derived from microbes and seaweed. They essentially change the biological mechanism of the plant, helping it absorb existing nutrients more efficiently from the soil.
It's literally a biological workaround to a geopolitical blockade.
It is. Okay, so that's a maritime chokehold. But there's another kind of geographical blockade happening right now, miles above the ocean.
The airspace issue.
Yeah. China has allegedly pressured several African nations, specifically the Seychelles, Mauritius, and Madagascar, to revoke overflight clearances for Taiwan's president, Lai Ching-te.
And this represents a major shift in how international infrastructure is actually used. The U.S. State Department called it an abuse of the international civil aviation system.
How so?
Well, to understand why, you have to look at how airspace works. Usually, a country manages flight information regions, or FIRs, over the open ocean, strictly to ensure aviation safety and air traffic control.
Okay.
It's supposed to be purely an administrative duty.
So it's supposed to be like traffic cops ensuring planes don't crash over the ocean. It should be completely neutral.
Exactly. But here, those safety mechanisms are being weaponized as political tools. By pressuring nations to deny overflight, Beijing is effectively turning the open sky into a gated community.
Wow.
Yeah, it's an administrative chokehold designed to enforce Taiwan's geopolitical isolation. It shows that you don't need military fighter jets to block a flight. You just need to manipulate the administrative paperwork.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Chokeholds aren't just physical or administrative anymore. They are increasingly digital.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's move from airspace to cyberspace. Anthropic has an unreleased AI model under Project Glasswing. It's reportedly called Mythos,
Right.
and it's specifically designed for defensive cybersecurity. But Bloomberg reported that a small group of unauthorized users managed to gain access to it through a third-party vendor environment.
And this raises a really important question about the nature of the tools we build.
Yeah.
Mythos is incredibly powerful at identifying digital security vulnerabilities.
It finds the hidden cracks in complex software systems.
Right. But the paradox here is terrifying. A tool designed to perfectly map out the vulnerabilities in a bank's security system is also the ultimate lockpick if it leaks.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's so potent that the RBI is actively consulting with global regulators and Indian lenders to understand the systemic risks this specific type of AI poses to the banking sector.
Oh, wait, okay, let's unpack this from another angle, because AI isn't just a security chokehold, it's an economic one. Have you seen this concept analysts are calling AI deflation? It is squeezing the IT sector right now. HCL Tech shares just plummeted nearly 11%. That's their biggest drop in over a decade.
And the mechanism there is totally counterintuitive
Yeah.
because, deflation usually sounds like a good thing for the end consumer. Things get cheaper.
They do, but for the companies providing the service, it's brutal. Tech companies essentially built an AI so good at its job that it's cannibalizing their own profit margins.
Yeah, the cost of providing a standard IT service is dropping rapidly because AI makes the coding and troubleshooting incredibly efficient.
Right.
Consequently, the size of the contracts these IT giants are signing is shrinking. HCL Tech had to dramatically lower its revenue growth expectations simply because AI can do the billable hours cheaper and faster.
See, the technology is choking traditional corporate revenue streams.
Exactly. And it creates a massive dilemma for governments. When technology creates these Wild West vulnerabilities in cybersecurity and simultaneously disrupts major economic sectors, the instinct is to regulate heavily. But strict regulation often becomes a chokehold on innovation itself.
Which brings us to the new Promotion and Regulation of Online Gaming Act. It was just notified by the Ministry of Electronics and IT, effective May 1st.
Right.
It's a fascinating counter-approach to the AI panic. They're calling it a regulation-light framework.
Yeah, for most online social games, they are intentionally not requiring mandatory registration or prior classification.
They're deliberately trying to manage the chokehold without suffocating the industry.
Exactly. By remaining hands-off on social gaming, they foster digital growth while keeping stricter boundaries reserved only for real money gaming. It's a highly targeted approach to digital governance.
So if the modern world is full of these global supply chain blocks, weaponized airspace, and digital vulnerabilities, how does a nation actually build its own immune system? I mean, how do we proactively stay resilient?
Well, resilience requires engineering redundancy across multiple domains simultaneously.
Yeah.
Let's look at defense and diplomacy first. India is actively diversifying its partnerships to avoid relying on any single geopolitical choke point.
Yeah.
Defense Minister Rajnath Singh was recently in Germany, securing ties for Project 75I.
And the strategy there isn't just buying submarines off the shelf, right? It's about securing a defense industrial cooperation roadmap.
Right.
By partnering with Germany to manufacture submarines domestically, India is ensuring that if global maritime supply chains suddenly choke, the naval shipyards at home don't stall out.
Exactly. Expanding on that diversification, we have the upcoming India-Nordic Summit. The focus there is heavily on the Arctic policy and the blue economy.
Right.
Building deep ties with Nordic countries opens up entirely new avenues for technology transfer and maritime cooperation. It spreads the strategic risk away from traditional volatile corridors.
And you have to build that physical resilience into the country's domestic infrastructure, too. I saw a highly visual example of this just yesterday.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, the Indian Air Force landed Jaguar fighter jets right on the Purvanchal Expressway in Uttar Pradesh. They transformed a commercial highway into an emergency airstrip.
That's incredible.
They bring in mobile air traffic control, manage the surface tension of the road, and instantly they have a functional base.
Wow.
It perfectly symbolizes building a backup plan into the everyday concrete. If a primary airbase is taken out, the infrastructure flexes instead of breaking.
And that philosophy of proactive engineering is being pushed at the highest administrative levels, too. Economic Affairs Secretary Anuradha Thakur spoke recently about the absolute necessity of disaster-resilient infrastructure.
What does that look like in practice?
A core mechanism here is integration at the design stage. If you spend the capital up front to strengthen a bridge or a power grid against climate and physical shocks, you avoid catastrophic systemic disruptions down the line. Resilience just cannot be an afterthought.
We are seeing that exact same logic engineered into our energy systems. The center just amended the aviation turbine fuel rules to allow the blending of sustainable aviation fuel, or SAFE, and synthetic hydrocarbons.
Right.
They aren't making it mandatory yet, but they are laying the legal and mechanical groundwork to reduce our dependency on imported oil.
And the power sector is proposing an even more complex structural change to build resilience through the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, the CERC. They are proposing a massive shift called market coupling.
Okay, let's unpack market coupling because it sounds incredibly dense. How does this actually change the grid?
Well, currently, India has multiple separate power exchanges, platforms like IEX and PXIL. Think of them like different stock markets, but for electricity.
Okay.
Right now, each exchange discovers its own electricity price based only on the buyers and sellers on its specific platform. The result is that you can have different prices for electricity at the exact same time, depending purely on which exchange you happen to be using.
Which seems wildly inefficient. It's like checking 3 different apps to buy the exact same stock and getting 3 completely different prices.
Exactly. It creates market fragmentation. So the draft regulations propose making Grid India the sole market coupling operator.
Oh, I see.
Moving forward, all the individual power exchanges will collect their bids and send them securely to Grid India. Grid India then uses a master algorithm to aggregate every bid nationwide and discover a single, uniform market clearing price.
Wow, so one grid, one algorithm, one price.
Yes, it optimizes the entire national system and makes it incredibly resilient against localized price shocks.
Resilience is local too, though. It's not all just national grids and fighter jets. In Delhi, Environment Minister Manjinder Singh Sirsa just expedited a massive 5-year real-time pollution source apportionment study with IIT Delhi.
Right, to tackle the smog.
Exactly. Instead of relying on static periodic data, which tells you very little, they are using mobile vans and advanced continuous sensors to map out PM10 hotspots.
And PM10 is that coarse particulate matter that really chokes the city's air.
Yeah, you can't fix a systemic chokehold, like toxic air, if you don't have real-time data pinpointing exactly which factory or intersection is causing it at, say, 2:00 p.m. on a Tuesday.
Optimization requires data, absolutely. But while we can engineer our physical infrastructure and data networks to be incredibly resilient, we also have to recognize that our democratic and constitutional systems face their own internal friction.
That's true.
Sometimes the chokeholds are built into the very fabric of how we govern ourselves.
Which brings us to a major federalism clash happening right now in West Bengal. And again, to you listening, we are looking at the constitutional mechanics of this friction entirely impartially.
Right. The friction points center around the jurisdictions of central versus state agencies. The Supreme Court had to intervene after the state government in West Bengal allegedly obstructed an enforcement directorate search operation.
Yeah, the ED was attempting to raid the office of a political consultancy firm, IPAC.
And the state government tried to block the Supreme Court's intervention by arguing that this was a fundamental jurisdictional dispute between the center and the state. In constitutional terms, they argued this fell under Article 131.
Let's define that quickly. Article 131 is essentially the Supreme Court's exclusive power to act as a referee in direct disputes between the central government and state governments.
Correct. The state argued it was an Article 131 issue rather than an issue for Article 32, which is the mechanism meant for individuals or entities protecting their fundamental rights.
But the Supreme Court rejected the state's argument entirely.
They did. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the language the court used was striking. Justice Mishra noted that you cannot have a chief minister walk in the middle of an ongoing investigation and use state machinery to obstruct a central agency.
Right.
The court explicitly stated that such intervention puts the mechanics of democracy in peril. When state and central forces actively clash, the constitutional machinery itself gets choked.
Okay, let's unpack this and pull it down to the ground level, though. How does this high-level constitutional friction actually affect the everyday voter?
Well, look at what happened with electoral rights in Bengal during this same period. The Election Commission undertook a massive adjudication process and deleted over 27 lakh voters over logical discrepancies.
And the fallout of that massive sweep created an administrative bottleneck that left millions of appeals pending right up until voting day.
Yeah.
Just days before the first phase of polling, the tribunals in West Bengal managed to clear a total of 139 names, 139 people out of 34 lakh pending applications.
Staggering.
The administrative system was so paralyzed that the Supreme Court had to invoke Article 142 of the Constitution. Article 142 is a unique provision that grants the Supreme Court extraordinary powers to pass any order necessary to do complete justice in a pending matter. They had to use this supreme extraordinary power just to direct the Election Commission to allow those 139 newly cleared citizens to cast their ballot. The bureaucracy was so choked that it required the highest court in the land to manually push 139 votes through the door.
Which is a perfect pivot to perhaps the most profound chokehold we face. How the system values a single person's vote and a single person's right to timely justice.
Let's talk about the delimitation debate. There's a brilliant analysis by Shruti Rajagopalan in the sources. Delimitation is the physical act of redrawing political boundaries and allocating Lok Sabha seats to states based on their population.
Right. But the number of seats has been frozen based on the 1971 census data.
Wow, 1971.
Yeah, and the historical context is critical here. That freeze was originally implemented to prevent states from being politically penalized for complying with national family planning policies.
Okay, so if a state successfully lowered its birth rate, it shouldn't lose its political voice in parliament.
Exactly. But fast forward a half century, and the consequence is massive systemic malapportionment.
Because the southern states successfully managed their population growth, while northern states saw massive population booms.
It creates a severe demographic penalty. Right now, one member of parliament in Kerala represents about 1.75 million people.
Okay.
Meanwhile, one MP in Bihar represents roughly 3.1 million people.
So the value of your vote is quite literally choked by the accident of your geography. Because of a data freeze from 1971, your single ballot cast in Kerala carries almost twice the electoral weight in Parliament as a ballot cast in Bihar.
Yeah.
It challenges the fundamental math of one person, one vote.
And we see the legal system hit similar limitations when trying to define abstract constitutional rights. Look at the 9-judge Supreme Court bench currently hearing the Sabarimala review petitions.
Right. The core debate revolves around Articles 25 and 26.
Exactly, which guarantee the freedom of religion and the right of religious denominations to manage their own affairs.
So it's the tension between fundamental equality and religious freedom.
Yes. During the hearings, Chief Justice Surya Kant made a profound observation about the mechanics of the law itself. He noted how incredibly difficult it is for a secular judicial forum to legally define what constitutes an essential religious practice for a specific group.
That makes sense.
The courts are essentially bumping up against their own boundaries, recognizing that legal frameworks are often inadequate to parse the nuances of ancient faith.
Right.
Barring issues of public order or morality, the court acknowledged that groups might have to define their own parameters because the legal mechanism simply isn't built to dissect theology.
I have to ask a really heavy question here, though. What happens when the system's chokeholds don't just delay a vote or struggle to define a religious practice, but completely and totally stall the pursuit of justice? What happens when the machinery fails entirely?
The 2006 Malegaon blasts case is the starkest example of this in our sources. Just this week, the Bombay High Court quashed the charges against the last 4 remaining accused in the case.
For context, in September 2006, bombs tore through a town in Maharashtra, killing 31 people and injuring over 300.
Yeah.
Over the next 2 decades, 3 different elite agencies, the Anti-Terrorism Squad, the CBI, and the NIA, investigated the attack.
And they produced entirely contradictory theories. They arrested completely different groups of people. And now, 20 years later, there have been 0 convictions.
Unbelievable.
The discharge of these last 4 accused has virtually halted the trial. When 3 different intelligence agencies spend 2 decades producing contradictory evidence, the legal mechanism seizes up. The burden of proof becomes impossible to meet.
There is a detail in this story that is just heartbreaking. It's about a man named Shafiq, whose 18-year-old son, Sajid, was killed in the blast.
It's tragic.
Sajid was studying to be a doctor. His bags were already packed to leave for a medical university. And 2 days after he was killed in the explosion, his approved student visa for China arrived in the mail.
It perfectly encapsulates the human cost of a stalled system. As Shafiq pleaded with the courts, if the system has decided that nobody caused the blasts, how did his son and 30 others die?
Right.
When the investigative process takes 20 years only to arrive at a blank slate, the pursuit of justice itself has been entirely suffocated by procedural friction.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. If we synthesize everything we've looked at today, we've traced a fascinating, sometimes troubling, map of our modern world.
Yeah.
We've seen geopolitical rivalries choking the Strait of Hormuz and the airspace over Taiwan, forcing entirely new agricultural and diplomatic strategies.
We've watched artificial intelligence create unprecedented cybersecurity risks while actively shrinking the revenue models of the IT sector.
Exactly. We've seen how resilience is engineered, from emergency airstrips on highways to coupling the entire national power grid, and we've examined the internal friction of our democracy.
From the struggle over central investigations in Bengal to the frozen mathematics of delimitation and the tragic deadlock of a 20-year terror trial.
Right.
So what does this all mean? We started out talking about the massive, invisible machine running our world. If systemic chokeholds are literally everywhere, from the global shipping lanes to the code running our banks to the very boundaries of our voting districts,
Yeah.
perhaps we're entering an era where personal adaptability is far more valuable than raw structural strength. If the system can stall at any given moment, the question is, how can you build your own internal resilience?
That's the real question.
How can you create your own mental emergency airstrip or your own personal market coupling to stay adaptable against the unexpected shocks in your own life?
Because a resilient system isn't one that never breaks. It's one that has already engineered the workaround before the crisis hits.
Something to mull over as you navigate your own pinch points this week. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you for listening. We'll catch you on the next one.